Hello everybody, my name's Oliver Sawtell, also known as Ozzy, and I suffer from bipolar disorder and depression. I've been suffering from these things for a considerable amount of time, pretty much my entire adult life, but only diagnosed around about 7 years ago when I had a major depressive episode. In this series, what I'm hoping to do is just give information to people, both to recently diagnosed bipolar sufferers, their friends, their family, work colleagues, bosses even, because I think it's really important that everybody understands what bipolar is and what bipolar isn't. There's a hell of a lot of misconceptions out there. Before I get into anything major, I want to talk about helplines, because if you're in crisis right now, either in a depression or you're thinking of hurting yourself or someone else, it's really important that you contact somebody quickly, because they can help. In the UK we have something called the Samaritans. I don't know whether that's a global organisation, but I'll give you the UK number. That's 08457 90 90 90. I'll put that up on the screen as well. That's 08457 90 90 90. Okay, so in this episode what I want to do, I want to talk about how it actually feels to have bipolar. Exactly how that feels. I'll elaborate quite a lot later on, and also what bipolar actually is, the medical diagnosis of that, what that actually means, and also most importantly what it isn't, because there's an awful lot of misconceptions out there. We need to challenge those misconceptions, and the easiest way to do that is to give you information about what it's not as well as what it is. I also want to talk about some treatments, my own personal experience with treatments, what medications I'm on, how to deal with a psychiatrist, and also most importantly how to start to practice mindfulness meditation and breathing meditation, because both of those things can really help a bipolar sufferer. So first up, how does it feel? To fellow sufferers, much of what I'm going to talk about now you're going to be quite familiar with. I should imagine it's even going to describe much of what you suffer every single day. But to everybody else, when you first hear about the symptoms of bipolar, you're probably going to think to yourself, well, everybody's like that, because everybody has mood swings, don't they? You go from being happy to sad, to being elated and angry, all within the space of a 24-hour period. That's normal, isn't it? Well, yes, it is. But for bipolar sufferers in particular, is that these dips and peaks are much more extreme. They're accompanied by other feelings as well, which can be utterly destructive, even on an up. There are loads and loads of different states within bipolar, or that are covered within the scope of bipolar. The two most commonly talked about are the two extremes. They're the destructive, depressive episodes, and the manic or hypomanic episodes where you get bursts of creativity. Most people who have some understanding vaguely about what bipolar is will probably understand that, and will have heard the term manic depression, because the swing between mania and depression is there. First off, I want to talk a bit about the depression. Depression is not Marvin the paranoid android from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, whose brain was the size of a planet and he was really depressed. The truth is, people who are depressed don't really like talking about the fact that they're depressed. They certainly wouldn't announce it to all and sundry. Hey, guess what? I'm depressed, guys. Not just because there's still stigma attached, but because when you're depressed, your self-worth is so low, you're probably not going to be able to talk to anybody. And most certainly when I've been having depression, it is the worst, most barren feeling that a person can have. I've written down an example, and I still think it's right. The depression is like this little voice in your head. It's not actually a voice in your head. I don't have multiple personality disorder, but it's like having that voice that everybody has in their head being overwhelmingly negative and telling you that you're shit. No matter what you do, you are utterly shit. You could be getting the prize for being the least shit person on planet Earth that day, And that little voice in your head will still tell you that you're utter shit, that you're totally worthless, that everybody loathes you, that everybody that you love doesn't love you anymore. It's that awful, and it is overwhelming. It comes into your head and there is nothing you can do to stave it off. Believe me, I've tried everything. I've tried alcohol, which certainly numbs the pain for a while, but it comes back and 10 times worse. So alcohol's not the solution. I certainly used to self-medicate with alcohol before I had a diagnosis. I think that's pretty common too, because it numbs you. But as I said, it stores up problem further down. Drugs like cannabis don't help. If anything, they're going to make it worse in the longer run. Nicotine doesn't help. Well, nicotine doesn't help anybody. No drugs really help. And then, of course, you've got the usual. Your friends, colleagues and everybody around you will tell you to pull yourself together. My analogy is this. To try and pull yourself together when you're depressed is like pulling together a ruin of a castle using a needle and thread. You just haven't got the right tools to do it. The tools that you have got aren't going to help you. So depression, on the scale that we're talking about when bipolar dips, is so excruciatingly awful. You'll end up being agoraphobic, i.e. not being able to leave the house because you're so scared, or not necessarily scared, but have a feeling of panic and paranoia that for some reason if you go out, people are going to look at you stupid and are going to know that there's something wrong with you, and it builds up and builds up and builds up into your head until you believe it. I'll come on to later about what that's called and what drug treatments there are for that, because it is something which can be treated. The most important point to cover with that is that you feel completely isolated, completely unwanted, completely unloved, completely worthless, and then on a severe dip you'll plan your own suicide. That's the difference between day to day, I feel a bit down, I feel a bit blue, and depression in bipolar. Ultimately it will end up with you planning your own suicide. Now, after saying all of that, I'm pretty much convinced that you're all going to feel pretty depressed. So let's talk about the flip side. Well, at least that's what they call it. There isn't really an upside for bipolar. Mania, even though the disease is called bipolar, isn't the polar opposite of depression. It's almost like another form of depression in my view. That's certainly not the view of necessarily the medical profession, but it's certainly my view. When you're in mania, or slightly watered down hypermania, and perhaps I'll touch on that in a future episode about what the differences are, everything seems absolutely possible. You've worked it all out. It's gonna work. You're gonna get humans to Mars using nothing more than a tube of toothpaste and a teaspoon. You're brilliant. You can on fire. You can be so creative. It's like an explosion in your head of creativity. You don't sleep, you don't eat properly, you don't socialise properly. If anybody dares challenge anything that you say, God help them, you're going to tear a strip off them, something dreadful. That's mania. And what else can I say? You feel like you could climb Mount Everest in shorts and t-shirts. And you feel a bit crazy, dare I use that word. You're not crazy, by the way, guys. Bipolar isn't a madness. Hypermania, as I said, is less, but you still end up being 1 billion times more productive than you normally would be. Don't sleep and all the rest of that stuff, none of which are good. I guess there is one small upside, and that is that there are people in history who have had bipolar, people like Vincent van Gogh, who obviously their creative output was off the scale, but the guy ended up shooting himself. I'm not surprised. There are other states. There are mixed states where you're both a bit depressed and a bit manic. at the same time, which I know I've experienced, and it's really very unpleasant. It's the most unsettled I've ever been. Then you have the normal kind of mixed state, where you have elements of both as you're bumbling along on that sine wave of bipolar. There's also times where these states will vary. Now, in typical bipolar, those variations could be years apart. So you'll have years of being manic, years of being depressed. And then there's something which is called rapid cycling bipolar disorder, which I suffer from, where those changes can be months apart rather than years apart. And that can be really very destructive to everybody around you as well as yourself. So there really isn't an upside, I'm afraid. Thankfully, these days, we've got a lot of treatments, and I'll come on to that later. But for now, let's talk about what bipolar actually is as far as the medical profession is concerned. So what is bipolar? There's two definitions I'm going to touch on. The first is from the NHS website, my beloved National Health Service, which everybody loves in the UK, unless they're insane. The definition of bipolar is: bipolar disorder, formerly known as manic depression, is a condition that affects your moods, which can swing from one extreme to another. If you have bipolar disorder, you will have periods or episodes of depression, where you will feel very low and lethargic; mania, where you feel very high and overactive. Less severe mania is known as hypermania. Symptoms of bipolar disorder depend on which mood you're experiencing. Unlike simple mood swings, each extreme episode of bipolar disorder can last for several weeks or even longer, and some people may not experience a normal mood very often. So there's one definition, very useful. Second definition I think is actually better. It's also shorter and punchier, and that comes from the mind.org site. Mind is a mental health charity in the UK. And it says this: if you have bipolar disorder, you will experience extreme swings in mood, from periods of overactive, excited behaviour known as mania or manic episodes to deep depression. Between these severe highs and lows, you may have stable times. And I actually think that's a better definition. I think we also need to say that, generally speaking, there is currently no known single cause for bipolar disorder. There's a lot of references I've seen which discuss childhood trauma being a potential trigger in a developing brain, where a sudden stress has caused a problem and a dysfunction within the brain and causes chemical imbalances later down the track. That's pretty much all I've seen, but I'd say that's conjecture more than anything else. There doesn't seem to be any hard evidence about that. But the fact that it is treatable by drugs, at least up to a point, would indicate that it is a chemical imbalance in the brain. And again, I've also read that bipolar could be caused, notice the word could, there's no current evidence to suggest this, but it could be down to nerve damage within the brain. Something that is really, really important, especially for UK residents, is that in this country, bipolar disorder is a recognised disability. Therefore, you have all of your employment rights protected by law. If you're discriminated against because of your bipolar disorder, that is a criminal offence by the employer. You need to get to know the Equalities Act 2010, and I'll put a note at the bottom of this video so that if you can, click the link, get to know it. It's very simple stuff, and it basically says if you have a recognised disability, you may not be dismissed because of said disability. It's really important you arm yourself with that, because it's your passport to trouble-free employment in the UK. I can tell from my own bitter experience that discrimination does occur, and it can be insidious. It doesn't look like it's actually happening, but really it is. And that isn't my paranoia talking, that actually was the case. Okay, So that covers off medical definitions as far as they go. As you can see, it's pretty light on the scale there, as you often find on your journey through mental illness. Everything seems a little bit woolly, and that's perfectly normal, and don't worry about that. Okay, the next segment we'll talk about what bipolar is not, because frankly, understanding what bipolar is not helps you understand better what bipolar actually is. So, what bipolar is not. Bipolar is not crazy or mad. It's a medical condition, pretty much just like any other disease, like diabetes or cancer or chronic lung disease. I even have a bit of the latter. The only difference is that the organ affected is your brain, and so therefore your mind. It also isn't being possessed by demons. Well, it seems a bit crazy me saying so, but this silly superstition is still around in some countries, and bipolar sufferers are routinely called possessed by demons. So it's important to say that it isn't. There's no supernatural cause here. It's a chemical dysfunction in the brain or a problem in the nervous system itself. There's no demons involved. It's purely medical. It also isn't just depression. An important distinction between clinical depression and bipolar is the fact that there are manic or hypomanic episodes as well. That doesn't feature in just depression, so that is important to note. It isn't just depression. Okay, let's look at some treatments. Okay, first up, I'm going to use some scary sounding terminology in this section. Most important thing to do is not panic. Bipolar isn't necessarily a scary condition, but the drugs that are used are called fairly scary things. So let's start with the first one, and that is the antidepressant component of the medication. Now, the most commonly prescribed medication in the United Kingdom is a drug called citalopram or citalopram. It is what they call an SSRI, which is a serotonin inhibitor, which stops the brain from absorbing as much serotonin as normal. Serotonin has the effect of calming you down and stopping you feeling depressed, so having more of it available is a great idea. I need to do some more research on the following subject, and that is finding foods or other sources of serotonin. It's something I've been looking at for some time, but not yet found an answer. There are some studies I've seen that recommend eating bananas, but bananas have other downsides in the fact that they contain so much sugar and potassium. So need to look at that in a bit more depth before I come to any firm conclusions, and as soon as I've seen any research that has got some evidence behind it, I'll certainly share it in a future video if there's call. So first of all, serotonin inhibitors are commonly prescribed in the UK for depression. They're very, very effective. They go on a sliding scale of dosage. I've been up as high as 60 milligrams, which is actually beyond the recommended dose, and it's very unpleasant, has some really shitty side effects, most notably in the erection department, so that's not so great. But at around 40 milligrams, probably about the maximum dose you're likely to get, and that's what I'm on now. It certainly is effective. It reduces the incidence of depression and also smooths over deep depressions and makes them less deep, which is very rewarding. Thank you. Now I've got to come to a scary word: antipsychotics. When anybody hears the word antipsychotic, and I've used it many times in conversation, you see this immediate look on their face. That's because, generally speaking, when somebody says the word psychotic, they mean serial killer, Norman Bates, etc. Now those guys do have a psychosis. They are psychopaths. But the psychosis that we're talking about in bipolar are the two bits which are the most debilitating. First of all, the agoraphobia, and second, the paranoia. Both of those are psychosis. The antipsychotics get rid of that almost entirely. It also has another impact, for me at least, and I am on Seroquel, which is also known as quetiapine, and at the right dosage it turns off anxiety. You know, that feeling that everything's gone wrong and everything's going to go wrong and something terrible is about to happen. That can be completely overwhelming for a bipolar sufferer, and what these drugs do is turn that off. I can tell you now I'm on 400 milligrams of quetiapine and I have no anxiety, no bipolar symptoms at all. So once again, it's important to stress that you are not a psycho. You're suffering from a mental illness, which is a chemical imbalance in the brain. Yes, you probably have some psychotic symptoms, i.e. paranoia and agoraphobia, but they are not likely to hurt anybody. If, however, you are thinking that you're going to hurt yourself or you're going to hurt somebody else, I urge you to call the Samaritans. The number was at the beginning of this video, and I will make sure that the number is posted in the notes below. Please do call them, even if you're from another country. These guys have saved my life twice. The two times that I've made plans to end my life, they were very serious plans, and it was only a call to the Samaritans that stopped me from going through with it. So it really is unbelievably important that if you have these feelings, that you get in touch with somebody who can help. The last part I want to cover, I did originally say I was going to talk about psychiatrists, but I think that would actually make a much better video in its own right, how to deal with psychiatrists and psychiatric units in the UK. It's going to be a very, very, very specific UK focus. Everything's done differently in other countries, so I want to focus on that on a separate video. But there is one thing which is universal, and that's meditation. Now I'll have a small admission here. I used to be a Buddhist up until extremely recently. It's not a question of losing faith with Buddhism. I still consider myself, philosophically speaking, Buddhist, but I no longer consider any of the supernatural stuff to be useful, and some of the things that have been going on in the Far East I totally disagree with. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm leaving Buddhism behind. But there are two things that I took from Buddhism which have also been proven scientifically in this country by some guys, I think in Oxford University. Again, I'll post some links in the notes. There's two types of meditation I want to talk about. The first, which is probably the most simple form of meditation that you can do, is breathing meditation. Now, I don't pretend to be a teacher of this stuff. I can certainly describe how you can do it. I could probably even do guided meditation sessions because I've done so many of them in my head. So if there was demand, I'd be more than happy to put together a guided meditation for breathing exercises. And if you've ever been to a yoga session, chances are you've probably had a 2 to 5 minute meditation. Now, we're not talking about 2 to 5 minutes meditation here. The breathing meditation that is taught in Buddhism and is also discussed at length in the mindfulness meditation books, again, which I'll put links in the notes below, works. And it works because it centers yourself. It stops you thinking about all the mad stuff in your head. It controls that tendency inside your head to race around thinking about 101 things. It gives you a control. It's highly effective. That's breathing meditation. So certainly do your own research. Again, I'll put notes, but do your own research on breathing meditation. The second type of meditation is equally, if not more so, powerful, and that is mindfulness meditation. Now, what mindfulness meditation does is it practices positive thinking inside your head. Now, that sounds a bit poncy, frankly. It sounds a bit hippy-dippy shit, but no, listen, it works. It works because instead of you going over and over and over things, you're centering yourself, you're thinking carefully about things, you're getting things into perspective, getting important things into perspective, and honestly, honestly, I swear, without mindfulness meditation, I would have been admitted to a psychiatric unit a long time ago. So I highly recommend it. Okay, those are all the subjects I really wanted to cover in this first video. I just want to end with a few little points, and this is my opinion. Bipolar is a really shitty disease, but with the right drug treatment and the right support network around you, you can overcome it. You can live a normal life. Sure, the chances are you're going to probably take off more sick days than the average Joe, but you will still have a good life. There is no reason at all why you can't have a good life and have bipolar 2. And that's a really positive thing to take out of this video. Now, if there's anything in particular you want me to cover in future episodes, please do let me know. You can do that in the comments section underneath this YouTube video. Please do, and please subscribe to this video, because that will tell me that people are interested, and then I might produce more. And if you've got specific questions that you would like me to answer, I'd be more than happy to do so. You can do that at nutterbroadcasting@gmail.com email address. I'll put that on the screen in a second, and post anything there that you like, and I'll go through it all. And if there's a nice big mailbox, then I shall definitely make some new videos based on your comments. I guess all the last thing for me to say is stay safe, and I can't stress this enough. Please remember, there are people out there that can help you if you're in crisis. Once again, I'm going to put the number on screen again for the Samaritans. If you are in crisis, if you think that you're going to commit suicide or are planning to commit suicide, if you're thinking of hurting somebody, please call the Samaritans, but don't do anything else. Call them first, because they will be able to help you. Okay. Until the next time, thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you enjoyed the video and that you will ask for more. Thank you very much. Goodbye.